Hi, thank you very much, all of you, for the very, very interesting presentations. My question is actually two-part. One, in the post-Good Friday Agreement era, the Great War obviously has been very much held up as a shared symbol, something that all sorts of different political parties can rally around in Northern Ireland. So I was hoping everyone on the panel could just comment a bit about its usefulness as a shared symbol. And secondly, I'm interested in specifically in the Battle of Messines, and this question is probably more for Professor Jeffrey, in terms of precisely how that fits into the shared history narrative. Messines is often the battle most held up as representative of a case where Irishmen and Ulstermen fought, or Protestants and Catholics fought side by side. There's also been some contradictory evidence that maybe it wasn't quite so shared on the ground as the official narrative emerging would tell us. So I was hoping, first of all, the overall usefulness of this as a shared symbol. Secondly, specifically, do the facts on the ground as represented in Messines actually support this? Thank you.
Keith?
Well, we'll start with the second, with Messines. Messines is used as, usefully emblematic because it is it's not quite the only time when the 16th and the 36th Division fight more or less alongside each other. They also fight alongside each other in the autumn of 1917 up in Passchendaele, Langemarck. But Messines is also kind of victory. In the context of these things, it's quite a successful operation, and it's not wildly costly. It doesn't have the awfulness of the Somme, nor does it have the awfulness of Passchendaele. And it's got plucked out as much for its symbolic value. Now, when you do look down, I have looked at this a bit. You do find there are these narratives, both then and now. Particularly from the Redmondite camp, when Willie Redmond, John Redmond's brother, is brought in dying to a Ulster Division casualty clearing station. There's a line, one of the nationalists says, there in that clearing station, the enmity of generations is lost in that sort of sacramental moment. And there's lots of that kind of thing you find even at the time, people trying to draw out of this. And it's been magnified hugely since. Now, I'm not against that. I think that it's extremely productive results in trying to find or to find some moment where we can find a common experience for this. I am slightly troubled as a historian, and more so than I was when I wrote my book about this, when I was quite favourable about this. On principle, there's a problem about mining the past for political advantage. And we have suffered from that in a bad way. Here's a moment where we're mining the past for political advantage, but it's kind of good political advantage, or nice result. But the principle, I don't see, the past is not something that should be, history should not itself be utilitarian or written for those kinds of purposes. Which is not to say that good things can't come out of these. So I have a slight worry about that. And this takes me on to this second bit. There are evidence of sectarianism being sustained on the Western Front. There's a story of Catholics and Protestants finding themselves at the same prisoner of war camp, and they're jolly well not going to be in the same cabins or things. I'm not doing that. This kind of stuff. So there's a good old tradition there, in a way. And if you look for these, you can find them. And of course, what people are not is not looking for those; they're looking for the others. But the holistic history, the real history, of course, has good, bad stuff as well as good stuff. And in that shared symbol, there is this way in which the twin poles, the twin axes of Ireland's engagement between 1914 and 18 in Ireland, which are the Easter Rising and the Somme. These are the things. And you saw this, the Queen's visit is a classic example of that in the spring. Day one, go to the National, Garden of Remembrance in Parnell Square. Day two, you go to the Irish National War Memorial. Job done, equal and opposite, cancel each other out. Dead, great, it's an absolute a gift. And it's done very well. And I have no problem with that in a way. That's great, but they are not equal and they are not opposite. It's not as if all those Irishmen celebrated in Parnell Square kind of cancel out all those Irishmen celebrated or commemorated at the Irish National War Memorial, because there's a group. When you look at these war memorials, you can have these lists of casualties, and I can give you a list of 8 casualties of Irish people who die on the first day of the Rising at the South Dublin Union. And there are 7 men, there are 7 men and 1 woman. 5 of those men are fighting in British Army uniforms. 2 of those men are fighting in volunteer uniforms, and the woman's in a nurse's uniform. Now, they're all Irish people, and they're all there. Now, and until we can accommodate that kind of difficult circumstance into our history as well, we're not finished. There's unfinished business there. So it's all great, but it's not that great, and we mustn't luxuriate too much in the wonderful, bonhomie of, as it were, remembrance.
Philip?
Yeah, there's obviously a danger in being positive about Irishmen from orange and green camps more or less fighting together. There's something wrong about that if you're neglecting the fact that you're out there killing young Germans and young Germans are killing you. So I think it's important to put it in a wider context. And one of the things I would like to see happen in response to your question is for us to try to look at what happened on the other side of no man's land, for example, at the Somme, in terms of Germans who were there. Young men from, I think, rural parts very often of Germany who might not have been all that dissimilar from the men they were facing in the 36th Division. And I think that's an important step to take if you're going to talk about the mutual humanity of the combatants on the Irish side. But then, on the other hand, that raises an interesting thing, because to dig up what actually happened to the Germans in the First World War is a different order of experience from looking at it in the Irish story. Reason being, there's so much more history happened in Germany after the First World War. It's buried in many ways beneath layer after layer of other stuff, which I don't need to spell out about the Nazi period and so on and so forth, the Cold War, so many other things. So what I would say, though, is that I think I mentioned earlier, I think for Unionists coming to the commemoration agenda, there is a distinct need to feel that there's a Britishness there, and that there's a sense that this is about the things that they will treasure, the Union Jack, the flags, the sense of connection to the British forces and so on, and that is always going to be part of what they bring to the table here. But I think that majoring in on the human story, one another's human stories, is terribly important in literally humanizing the experience for both Unionists and Nationalists, if that's not too vague. What I want to finish on is saying that I have experience, as I'm sure other folk have, of seeing folk from Nationalist and Unionist backgrounds, sometimes ex-combatants, actually, in our recent conflict, talking together with each other, and it's just so hope-inspiring to see that happen. And it is one of the territories where it is happening, where men are and women are talking to one another about this past, and that's very positive. And I will say that one of the sites that many people from a Unionist background make for when they get to France, believe me, is the memorial to the 16th Division at Ginchy. That's where many of them love to go, because it is a way, almost perhaps a proxy way, of acknowledging the Catholic identity and the nationalist identity to some degree. I know, for example, where I come from in Carrickfergus, one of the community's workers there in the Loyalist community has said, that's where the young men love to go, to see that. And I find that intriguing. It's a way perhaps of opening up channels that wouldn't otherwise be opened up, the more need to be opened up.
Jim, the First World War is common ground?
Yes, thank you very much, Evan. I agree with both speakers. I've just reminded that song. There's a good tradition of love and hate sitting by the fireside, which could be the national anthem for us, I think, if we ever decided to. But I think there's a danger. I think both Philip and Keith have illustrated it. If you go mining and you look what you're mining for, dead on, you'll find it. There was plenty of people fought in the war. For example, I came across a figure there. They reckon that in the British Army, one form or another, there might be 5,700,000 people who actually were engaged in the war. Yet 312 were shot at dawn, but they would be proportionately, a lot of attention would be paid to them. If you go mining, you'll find what you want to mine. I'm thinking of the Willie Redmond story, for example. I came across a recent reference from a lieutenant in the 36th Ulster Division. And he said, this was a fine man. He had enlisted for Home Rule. He was far too old. He wasn't healthy enough. He was John Redmond's brother. And he wasn't healthy enough. He was killed at Why Should I went to his funeral. On the other hand, if you read people like sort of Wilfred Spender, it's obvious that, they're in for a political purpose. John Redmond sends them Shamrock in 1916, the Western Front. He says, who does he think he is? I'm going to send him Ulster Lilies, first chance I get, 12th of July. The Pope sends holy medals. He writes to his wife, I'm going to send sort of the heresies of the Pope, to him. Now, this book I have. And it's just that there is this obvious, it depends where you look. There's a problem there. Messines itself, there's a problem there that I think that looking back, don't be too rosy about it. Like, there was political reasons for joining up, and you can't get away from that. There was also other reasons, but you don't over-romanticise it. Messines was regarded as the best operation of the war, the most successful operation of the war. And yes, the 16th and 36th Ulster Divisions were involved, but it was Herbert Plummer's careful planning and mining and the explosion, really, the massive underground bomb that really made the success of that operation. I think that should be borne in mind as well. I think the main thing is a thing that both speakers have alluded to. It's the scale of the Great War. It's the scale of it. It's the way that affected everything. That has to be thrown into the balance. Eric Hobsbawm, the professor at Cambridge, said, look, don't try and study the 20th century from 1901 to 2001. You're wasting your time. The period from 1914 previous, it really belongs more to a Victorian era, a more innocent era. The First World War was a game changer. 4 empires alone fell: Austro-Hungarian, Russian, Ottoman. Austro-Hungarian, Russian, Ottoman, German. And you can maybe arguably the British Empire just started to fold after that too. The world changed. Jonathan Barden put it well. He said people have been used, people who normally wouldn't have slapped a child for misbehaving, spent long periods of time trying to kill people they'd never met. And they got used to using weapons to enforce the rule of law or enforce their will. And he calls it's rightly called the age of extremes. And that carried through as well. Looking back, there's as much in the Great War overall to sober us and put ourselves in context. And let us see that there's worse things happened, as alluded to by Philip. But I think it would be a mistake just to mine the Great War, to reinforce this is a grand wee place. Wouldn't it be all great if we all stood together? In many ways, it illustrates the extremes to which we're prepared to go.
Just recalling that the head of the Irish National Volunteers in Belfast, who was a local doctor called Hugh McNally, went down in the Hampshire with Kitchener in 1916. And one of the poignant things about the death of Willie Redmond was that his last words on this earth were heard by a namesake, the Reverend John Redmond, the rector of Ballymacarrat in East Belfast, another Redmond, so it's interesting.